You're listening to Bloomberg Businessweek with Massar and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
Well, a headline just crossed the Bloomberg terminal just a moment ago, talking about the EU getting ready to maybe place France on its fiscal watch list. France at risk of flouting the European Union's fiscal guidance, while Germany and Italy are deemed not fully compliant. This is according to people familiar with the matter. You know, we've got a perfect voice to really talk about what is going on the ground in France in terms of its economy, Tim.
I'm very pleased to have with us Pierre Moscovici, president of France's Court of Accounts, which we mentioned earlier is France's supreme body for auditing the use of public funds in France. We should note it is independent from the government and parliament. Pierre has just a fantastic and fascinating background. Former European Commissioner for Economic and Financial Affairs, Taxation and Customs from 2014 to 2019. And he joins us here, Carol, in the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio.
Well, really fascinating to have you in studio. How are you?
Great. Since I'm here.
Well, it's great to have. So, before we get into, we have a kind of a list of questions we want to get to in terms of the French economy. I have to ask you, though, because we have spent the day talking about artificial intelligence and OpenAI and the turmoil, if you will, at that company and the jockeying that is going on. The whole world is enamored with artificial intelligence. All business, global business, feels like they are enamored about it, racing toward it. What are your thoughts when you think about artificial intelligence, the importance when it comes to a country's economy, businesses' economies?
Well, that's, of course, becoming huge, and it's going to be fantastic and gigantic in the future. Everybody knows that, and we all need to first invest on AI, use AI, and control AI. I chair an institution which role is to control public finances. We are working on the strategy of the government for AI, and we are users of AI. I didn't follow. I followed, but I'm not familiar with this company, with what happened. But I think that it illustrates the conflict we are facing and we will be facing between the necessity to develop AI, to invest on AI, but also to regulate AI. Because there are matters there of ethics, about how we can control the evolution of AI, the way it will change our lives, our freedoms also. And so that's a major issue on which we must work, I would say, intensively, but without fantasies.
So tell us about what concerns you, like what the guardrails, in your opinion, you think need to be in place when it comes to ethical use of AI and making sure that AI doesn't get out of control.
Well, again, I'm not a specialist of that, but I was EU Commissioner for 5 years, and before a Finance Minister, that means Secretary of Treasury in my country. And I see that going on and raising rapidly. And we need absolutely to have rules about that. You know, the EU is a rules-based system. The US is also a rules-based country. And we need to have rule of law, absolutely. And we need to establish a law so that the ethics limits are fixed and they are respected. And again, without fantasies. Let's not imagine that it's Big Brother. That's not it. But we know that some uses of AI can be dangerous or threatening for our freedoms, for our lives too. And this needs to be addressed.
Is it different from overseas?
And I think that in Europe, as I said, we're a rules-based system, and we are also involved in the global world, global economy, and global institutions such as G20, G7, IMF, etc. The good place where regulations should intervene is at the European level. We are united in Europe, and I don't think that national regulations are the proper answer.
That's interesting.
You could have, I would say, a EU regulation plus national applications of the regulations.
But EU should
and this is something that we should also propose to the rest of the world.
Well, that's what I was going to say. There needs to be global cooperation on this.
Why I'm here in the US, just a few words about that, because I'm a member of the board of editors of the United Nations. And in this capacity, a few minutes ago, I was with the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, and he established a high-level working group on AI, with precisely that purpose, to have a global answer to that.
Are there real fears, though? Like, is it not akin, Pierre, if I may ask, akin to the concern about just the data collection that has been done by so many of the global social media companies, whether it's a Google, whether it's a Meta, right? Privacy concerns. Safe to say Europe has really led the way on this in terms of oversight. But is this a much bigger threat, artificial or generative artificial intelligence?
Probably because it's the next step in technology. But it might be as well new companies, and also these ones. We must watch that. You know, we again were pioneers in regulating that in Europe in order to protect personal freedoms. I was a member of the Commission when we launched that, and I think that it's quite, I wouldn't say an example, but something that the rest of the world can look after. And that's why we must think about the future of AI with, I would say, the same optic.
I've got to share with you this anecdote. I shared it with Carol earlier. On Friday, I was flying with my family to Florida. We had an issue with our bag, so I called customer service. And the menu came up. It asked if I wanted to, speak to somebody in English or Spanish. And then the third option was, if you are a French citizen, please press 3. And if you do not consent to being recorded. One country in the entire world being singled out at customer service. So
EU.
It was pretty amazing. This was specific to France. Maybe, but is that that's an EU regulation, you say?
I would say so. Again, I can mistake, but.
But talk a little bit about that, because I wonder if there is this concern among entrepreneurs that the regulations could prevent companies from growing to the full extent in France or the EU versus other countries that don't have the same regulations in place.
Yeah, that's always the debate that we have. But I think that we can strike a right balance between competitiveness, which is absolutely decisive, having growing businesses, and AI is a fantastic source of revenues, and as well job creation on the one hand, but also job destruction on the one hand, changing of jobs.
As is any innovative technology.
Absolutely, but this is something which is growing rapidly, and we can see that it will, I wouldn't say destroy, but change the course. Again, an example. I was in the UN. There are translators there. The future of they need to keep their jobs, but probably it will move with AI. It will transform. So the proper word probably is job transformation with AI. But again, we must strike the right balance between competitiveness and the protection of our freedoms. Because if we don't take care of that, well, we could be in a mess in a few times. And as this technology is fantastically growing and rapidly, well, it could be faster than one may think. That's why I think regulation must be addressed as well at the global level. This is UN or OECD or that kind of institutions. At the continental level, the global players in the world, the US, Europe, I don't dare talking about China, India, etc., must certainly have their own protection. And then we must also decline that at the national level. We talked about France. This is something also that we can address.
But not happening yet.
Not yet, but I can see, and maybe what happened to Mr. Altman is an example of that this research of the balance between competitiveness, profitability, raising business, and ethics is a matter that is important as well for public regulators, but for governments, but also in companies, in business.
No, well said, right? Because we've seen what happens when really the business side kind of just runs, that's kind of the one mission. And I think about the data privacy issues, which have come so much later, right? The oversight as these companies were building up. And maybe we just didn't realize, but
that's something that, again, Europe was in the lead.
Absolutely.
To develop. But these tech giants, they must also, of course they must develop, but they must also behave, I would say, good citizens. One matter on which I concentrated or dedicated a lot of efforts when I was EU Commissioner was taxation, global taxation. And there is an agreement at the OECD level signed by some 130 countries which plans to tax properly the digital sector. And it's not yet implemented, and we must do that. And probably with AI, it's a kind of parallel attitude that we must think about.
We're talking with Pierre Moscovici. He is president of France's Court of Accounts. He's former European Commissioner for Economic and Financial Affairs, Taxation and Customs. He's here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio. The French economy, the second largest in the European bloc. Talk to us about your economy. I mentioned this headline that crossed earlier about France at risk of being placed on the EU's fiscal watch list. This is according to people familiar. The list will be out on Tuesday. Tell us about the economy in terms of what you guys, the biggest obstacles, the biggest concerns right now.
I would say there are two aspects. The first one is about macroeconomics. And I would say in the European context, France is rather doing well. Better, for example, than Germany, which is now in recession, and then Italy with a slow growth, I would say. Globally in the EU, the forecast for next year is gloomy. If we have a 1% growth rate, it's fine. It might be less, but we all know we all suffer from the same world imbalances, etc. You see that too here. So there is a slowdown. And in this context, I think France is doing, a solid performance due to the size of its market, the quality of its companies, the quality of the workforce too, and innovation also. I mean, we are among the best in Europe for the time being. The second aspect is about public finances. I'm not so worried about any kind of fiscal watch list for a simple reason, is that we have rules in Europe called the Stability and Growth Pact, and these rules have been suspended since the COVID crisis, and they are not yet re-established. They could be re-established next year. But it's true that if you compare growth in France and in Germany, for example, France is doing better now. I wouldn't say the German economy is solid and probably is going to recover, but it's in difficulty, and the difficulty is structural. What will happen with the car industry, the dependence on Russian gas in the past, and how can it be transformed in the future? We don't have that kind of problem since, for example, we have a very strong nuclear energy program that we are going to develop. But on public finances, of course, Germany is much more solid than we are. Germany has a stability culture that France is looking for, I would say. So there is no problem of sustainability with France's public finances. This is a reliable country, a member of the Eurozone. It's associated with Germany. We are in the framework of those rules, and we will respect it. But of course, I think the level of our deficits and debt is, I would say, too high. And this needs to be reduced. And this is why...
Something that we deal with here in the United States, certainly, too.
That's a problem also. But with the difference is that you've got the privilege of the dollar that we don't get. And we are in this broad ensemble, which is the Eurozone. And this is why the government is starting now to make efforts in order to cut some public expenditures, to reduce deficit, and trying to find some sources of reduction of debt and deficit.
Well, speaking of the Eurozone, let's talk a little monetary policy. Do you think the ECB has done enough to control inflation, or do you think it's done too much and now risks recession for some of the European countries that you spoke about?
I've been a finance minister in my country. I've been a EU commissioner. I'm now chairing an independent, and I learned once, never comment on decisions of the central bank. They're independent and they're very jealous of the independence. I would say that, it's just like in the US. I mean, now the inflation seems to be, I wouldn't say under control, but clearly receding. And that's good, because inflation creates problem in everybody's revenues, and that also creates social discontent.
Erodes value.
That's a sort of a source of also political discontent, and so it's good. It had to be done. As far as I know, the ECB doesn't plan new interest rates raising. They are rather stable. Probably at one moment they will start diminishing the interest rate. They didn't announce that kind of guidance, so let's wait. But I would say stability is there. And of course, even if we are two different continents, the decisions of the Fed and the ECB are not interconnected, but probably well informed one by each other.
When you look at, we were talking a little bit about geopolitics in the break. When you look around the world, what makes you the most nervous? Is it what's going on in the Middle East right now? Is it what's going on between Ukraine and Russia, now getting ready for a third year of war? I think about China and the pressures and the conflicted relationship I feel like the world has with China. I think about we face a presidential election, that there's some nervousness about the outcome and what that would mean for the leader of the U.S. with the rest of the world. Top of mind, or you can say all of the above.
All these things are interconnected. We live in a dangerous world, in a dangerous moment, at a dangerous period. Obviously, first, war is back. War in Europe, and this did not happen since World War II. Ukraine is a war in Europe, even. Ukraine is not, for the time being, a member of the EU, probably in the future. And I think that we need to enlarge our Europe in order to welcome Ukraine, but also Moldova, Georgia, and the countries from the Balkans. This will take time, but this is a process that is, I wouldn't say ongoing, but starting. There is a tragedy ongoing in the Middle East, and this has a tremendous impact also on our political life, since we see that it's a very divisive factor. This tragedy is an horror. There was first a pogrom committed against the Israeli people by the Hamas, and now there is a reaction, but this reaction is also very tough for civil population, especially for children, and there is a high sensitivity about that. And so there are two wars together. And for a country like the US, but also for Europe, the question is, how can we help? And we need to deliver weapons, for example. And this is a financial need, which is huge. These are two dangers. The third thing is that...
In just 20 seconds, forgive me.
Populism all over the world. Victory in Argentina, elections in the US, electoral cycle in Europe. This is also something I really fear, because a dangerous world led by populists, sorry to have this political world, is something that I wouldn't like to live in.
Pierre, thank you so much. Come back soon. Pierre Moscovici, he's first president of France's Court of Accounts, joining us here in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. This is Bloomberg.